Well, good morning and welcome to our Murray Next Steps event for here in June. I'm Roy Riley with Peel and Holland.
Yeah, I'm Matt Johnson with Journey Church. Thanks so much for joining us online, Roy. It's a little different.
It is a little different today, but we're certainly excited to having you join us today. Next Steps, it's our opportunity to continue conversations on leadership development. We started Next Steps. Matt, can you believe it's been 2 full years ago now?
Yeah, 2 years of this.
We've been hosting Next Steps, and they are opportunities for leaders to get together and continue conversations in leadership development coming out of the Global Leadership Summit every August. So this is our June Next Steps event. We're obviously coming to you in a different format than normal. We're live here in the Journey Studios at the Swan Warehouse. Matt, thank you and your team for hosting us today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Our Next Steps events are typically face-to-face, and we're certainly going to miss seeing everybody, having our networking opportunities, and certainly miss enjoying a great lunch together. I do want to give a special shout-out to CFSB. They are our leadership development partner here in Murray. They always provide our lunch every day. So Jason Pittman and team here in Callaway County, we appreciate you and appreciate your commitment to leadership development. And Matt, again, thanks to Journey for not only sponsoring GLS, the Global Leadership Summit, but being our partners with Peel and Holland for Next Steps, because we firmly believe that when leaders get better, everybody wins and our community wins. So especially today, hosting us here, Matt, we appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. That is our motivation. You mentioned Global Leadership Summit. So this past August at the 2019 Summit, servant-based leadership was one of the top topics that people said, hey, we'd love to dive into more. So we're going to do that today, and we're going to do it in the context of a couple of things that we're all living through right now. The pandemic, what is servant-based leadership? What's it look like? What's it continue to look like as we serve people through COVID-19? And then also with the racial injustice issues that have arisen, we're going to talk about the role of servant-based leadership and all of that. So in just a minute, we're going to introduce you to the two smart people that Roy and I brought in here to answer all that.
Got a great panel today, don't we, Matt?
And we're going to talk for a few minutes as a panel, but then after that, we're going to take questions. So if you have questions that you would like these panelists to address, feel free to drop them in the comments below right here on this feed, and they're going to be texting those to me and Roy, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. So let me introduce you to this guy to my left, to your right. Many of you probably know who he is. This is Kevin Saul. He's athletic director at Murray State University, and probably more importantly, husband and dad to 2 boys. So thanks for being with us, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Honored to be with you guys. Thank you.
Kevin, we appreciate you joining us, and I get the honor of introducing Damori Fields to us. Damori's a 2010 graduate from Murray High School, where he was an outstanding athlete and especially excelled in football. So, Kevin, you'll have a lot in common there. Damori did coach football for over 7 years with Murray High. He started with Kentucky Lake Oil in 2016 and is currently the Employee Relationships Manager at Kentucky Lake Oil. Damori has 3 kids, and full disclosure here for everybody, Damori is family for me. Damori has been a key part of my life and our family's life for over 10 years now, and I consider him a son, so if he refers to me as Pops, there may be a good reason along the way. So, Damori, we appreciate you joining us today. You and Kevin, we're looking forward to a great panel discussion. So, Matt, why don't you kick us off today?
Yeah, so let's jump into this. When we're talking about servant-based leadership, in general, we're talking about the kind of leadership where you put the good of others before yourself, where you're willing to sacrifice whatever the cost to help someone else succeed. So I'm going to start with you, Kevin. Let's just dig into this. I know when you first came to Murray, we sat down and talked early on, and this was a theme that came out immediately in our conversation. I know you believe very deeply in it. Talk a little bit about the impact servant-based leadership has had on you, how you've developed some of these principles, how you've seen this make such an impact.
Yeah, and certainly appreciate that opportunity. Matt's been a mentor to me since I arrived here, and we've talked early on about that. But, servant-based leadership, I think, is inherent with higher education. And I've been involved in higher education since I was a young guy. My dad is a psychology professor, Mom was an advisor in a College of Arts and Sciences, and they devoted their professional lives to serving young people as they walk their journey through higher education. And so that's my backdrop there. I've been in athletics administration on a campus for 20 plus years, and I learned from some great mentors.
Yeah.
Early on in my career, Max Urich was the AD at Kansas State, and Max's philosophy was that the student athletes were the center of the bullseye. It didn't mean that other things weren't important, but everything ought to be focused in on, and the objective is the center of the bullseye, and that being our student athletes. Mitch Barnhart's tremendous mentor for me for 12 years in Lexington, and he and Connie and their family lived servant leadership, whether it was in athletics administration or through their faith or their involvement in their community. Just a great example and a good mentor for me as well. And obviously Dr. Jackson, president of our university, has devoted his professional life to public service. Whether that's through the state legislature or as president or faculty on campus. And so I've had some tremendous mentors in my time. Just briefly, I think the servant leadership for us takes the form of developing young people. Simply put, we're developing young people. And you can break that down into student, person, player, classroom, community, on the field. And that's typically where it stops with most athletic departments. And I firmly believe that there's one more step, and that's professional. That ultimately our goal is to progress as students, as people, as players here, but the real goal is the professional aspect, being good husbands and wives and holding down great jobs and supporting families. And so for us, we've got 326 student athletes, and they all come with a very, very unique walk and journey. And they all have different needs when they come here. And so for us, 36% of those are first-generation college students. So when we're successful, we're ushering generational and transformational change. And that, to me, is what I get out of bed every morning to do, is to serve those young people, change their families.
No, that's a great example.
So, Demore, you heard Matt's question. When you think about servant-based leadership, what does that mean to you, and who's been those influencers for you over your years?
Mine's not much different from Kevin. There was a handful of people that I deal with playing football or going to school, and one was Steve Duncan. Those of you who've been around Murray know Steve Duncan. His philosophy is he's trying to make boys into men. So, and that's what really influenced me as a young man to follow my path I'm now, which, I've been working with the company I'm working with for 4 years. So I'm dealing with 170 employees. So leading by example. When I was coaching, showing those guys the ropes, what I dealt with and what I changed, things I had to do. And now I'm basically being a father to 3 kids and leading by example, putting myself out there and showing them different things that you can overcome and what different challenges you face. When you're coaching football, Kevin, you may relate to this, everybody's different. You can't approach each kid the same way. I grew up totally different from the next man, and he grew up totally different from the next. So you approach everything different, and you try to reach out to those kids and show them there's much more to life than football, because eventually it's going to end. What can you become after football's over? That Steve Duncan, along with my mother, and Roy already told you guys, he's like a father to me, so Roy has helped me grow as a man as well. So having those influence in my life has brought me to something I am now, and still raising my 2 sons and daughter to be something much more than an athlete.
Yeah, no, that's tremendous. And I think, Demore, what you said about lead by example, to me, that's the starting point of servant leadership.
Yes, sir.
If you don't have that, nobody's adopting any of the other principles, right?
Exactly. With that being said, my field, I don't ever ask an employee to go and clean the bathroom unless I'm willing to do that. I can't ask them to come and work for us if I'm not willing to do those type of things. Yep. So leading by example is the best way I know how.
Yep.
I can talk all I want to, but if I'm out there doing something different, everybody's going to pick up on it and go a separate direction. Essentially makes me a hypocrite.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, Kevin, you have any thoughts on that? Because you touched on that as well when you were telling your backstory.
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important to lead by example, because ultimately when you're talking about leadership and developing relationships with young people, you've got to establish some credibility as well, right? And so seeing that and leading by example is so important. I think about Simon Sinek's got a book that it's leaders eat last,
Yes.
right? So in everything that you do, whether it's in line for food, whether it's certain benefits or things that might be coming through, or whatever the case may be, is making sure that the institution and the entity that you represent is always represented and is always out front as a higher priority than your individual goals, which ultimately speaks to putting others' needs before your own, which is the definition of service.
Yep. Not to take us too far off track here, but I want to follow up and ask you guys both this. I think there comes a point with leaders where they reach this critical juncture and they have to decide, am I going to do what's best for me in this moment or what's best for the organization, even though it may cost me? And depending on how much success you have, there comes a point, I think, where all leaders hit that. And you touched on it. Either one of you want to weigh in on the tension that a leader feels when they're choosing, this is best for me, but this is best for the organization, and how you navigate through that when you're facing it.
I honestly, I kind of deal with it every day. And that's dealing with, when you deal with different people, you, like you said, put yourself last. So, and you tell people, I'm doing what's best for the organization. I'm not looking out for Demori. And if you're doing what's best for the organization, essentially, Demori follows.
You'll be taken care of.
Exactly. So that's the way I approach it. And when I'm out there hiring, whether I'm training people and trying to show them the best way to do things, I look out for the organization, and essentially it's for me as well. But I think you can't say I am doing what's best for the organization and not doing what's best for Demori, because if Demori's at his best, he's doing what's best for the organization, if that makes sense.
And that's a mindset you walk into every day with that mindset.
Correct.
That doesn't happen naturally.
No. And that's the three people I named has instilled that in me. I truly believe if you surround yourself with successful people, it's hard to go the other route. And
that's a great point.
You can see the other side of it, and I have seen the other side of it growing up. But like I said, Steve Duncan has instilled that in me, and I can tell you a story about it. It's holding me accountable.
Yep.
Being 17 years old, as a freshman in high school, I could see myself going down the wrong path. He came in when I was a junior, and we would work out, and I didn't really take it serious. And we would work out, and he would take us, about a handful of us, take us to his house and feed us tuna fish, peanut butter, bananas. And he held us accountable. Yeah. If we wasn't there, then he would come to my house. And he would pick me up and take me to his house. So holding people accountable and showing people different ways and showing people the right way, I think everything else follows, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and you say it much more eloquently than I would, but I look at the servant leadership as a starting point. It's almost like a prerequisite. It's the ground floor.
Yes, sir.
But the ultimately, if you're gonna get to the synergy, right, or the sum of the individual parts is greater than the individual parts. Yep. I think there's an element of sacrificial leadership that has to take place. And Demori, you gave a perfect example where you have to give of yourself, which means you've got to do something that might be the hard right over the easy wrong that you wouldn't normally do individually because of the individuals and the organization that you surround yourself with. And if you're going to get to that true synergy and maximize your potential, everybody in that organization has got to give up something of themselves for there to be ultimate group gain and maximization.
Absolutely. I'm interested, we've been through some really interesting times in the last 3 months, certainly with COVID, the impact that we've had on our community, on our nation, on our world. How have you all been displaying and practicing servant-based leadership like you both talked about so well in the last few months, and how's that played out in your day-to-day business environment, environment at Murray State? Kevin?
I'll start it. I think the last 3 months when you deal with the health crisis, COVID-19, right? I'm not sure any of us in March 1st could say we were equipped
no.
to manage that at a high level, right?
And we didn't have that plan in the folder, did we?
Yeah, that
plan in the folder.
Playbook did not include
exactly
the last 3 months.
And I've heard it several times where putting the plane together while we're flying it is a good analogy. But I think a lot of patience and a lot of communication has been key in that. In athletics, we have a great staff, and we are all type A personalities. And if you were to throw a puzzle out on the floor, we'd start organizing it with edge pieces and different colors and all the things you do to put a big puzzle together. And the challenge was in mid-March, we didn't have all the pieces. Yeah. And we didn't even have the picture. And so you're missing those elements. And working through that together, I think you've got to have a high level of communication. You've got to have that servant and sacrificial leadership. And ultimately, I think you've got to be flexible and nimble to what's going on in your surroundings so that you can react quickly.
That's good.
With me, I mean, I don't think the answer is going to be very much different, but it starts with communication, and it doesn't start with me. It starts above me, the owner of the company, the president, and the supervisors. You know, we never stopped doing what we had to do to show the people that our employees that we're in it with them, if that makes sense. We never stopped traveling to all of our locations. We always went there. You know, we may cut back on hours, but at the same time, we never stopped visiting those stores. We didn't sit in the office and say, y'all deal with it. You know, we led by example and showed them we're in this together. And I think having a great organization around you and pushing you to be that, and people around you to push you to be that, I think it falls right into place. Kevin used a great example using the puzzle. You know, we all attacked this head on because every day was different for us.
Yep.
Every day we did not know what to expect. Every day I would come into an email saying such and such is off work due to scared of having the virus. So, you know, and we'll attack it and tackle it. And so this pandemic has taught us different things to do or how to attack different plans or different stores.
What I love about what you both said, you mentioned communication and you mentioned presence, like being there with them. And sometimes I think that's overlooked. We may have a heart to, I want to put them before me and I'm thinking about them. And I think that's what great leaders did when the pandemic hit, is they immediately thought, how does this impact my team and how can I best serve them? What do they need? But if you don't communicate that clearly and you don't show up, then they can't read our minds and they can't read our hearts.
Exactly.
And so I love that because those are really practical examples. While there isn't certainty, there can still be clarity on our part, and that's what people need the most. It's a great way to serve them, and it sounds like that's what both of you naturally did.
I think there's a vulnerability in that as a leader.
Yep.
Right.
Yes.
To be able to stand in front of a group of student athletes or employees or staff or whatever the case may be, and say, hey, I'm going to tell you what I know. I'm going to tell you what I don't know.
Yep.
And we're just going to attack what we don't know one day at a time.
Yep.
And work our way through it to get to a good spot. And that vulnerability is important, I think, in a leader.
Would you guys agree that the trust you had built with your teams prior to the pandemic, in other words, you both had enough history with your teams, they saw you put their interests before your own. So you had enough trust when the pandemic hit, you could sit down and have a conversation and go, here's what we don't know, which probably included for both of you, we don't know if all of your jobs are going to stay here. We don't know how this is going to impact you, but you had enough trust that they could follow in spite of the uncertainty. Is that fair?
Yes, sir. It was a tough conversation to have. Being a leader and going in and saying, well, you don't know, because we've never faced this before. But going in and saying that, I don't know, I got to go home to my family just as well as you do, but we're going to attack this thing together. And being that leader, and being there with them in their presence, like you said, and talking to them, I think it makes that core group even stronger. Steve Duncan, you always tell us, you're only as strong as your weakest opponent or weakest team
member.
So, and you take that and you run with it. And, if you got somebody that's not as strong, you spend time with that person and you try to bring them on. And you trying to pick up the, not slack, but, you kind of show them that, I've been there before. I can help you through this.
You inspire them to grow.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think one of the most critical components of that leadership, and you touched on it, Matt, is that building of the credibility.
Yes.
Right. There's 2 books that we walk through with our captains and emerging leaders in athletics. We've been trying to meet once a month with our captains and then emerging leaders to help educate our captains on how to be leaders and what that looks like, and then ultimately your emerging leaders. And what you do is you hope to snowball and teach each other as it goes. And one of the books is The Captain Class by Sam Walker.
Tremendous book.
There's a chapter in there that's called Carrying the Water. And there's some specific examples there, but basically what it means is the leader or captain of a team does small efforts of selfless service and sacrifice every single day to ultimately build up the credibility for critical times like COVID-19, where your team knows what's on your heart. They know you, and that's important to be vulnerable and share with your team what's on your heart. But you build up that credibility so that they will ultimately follow along and feel comfortable helping establish the direction. That piece is important too. And another book very similar, it's called Legacy. It's about the Australian rules rugby team called the All Blacks, and they have one that's called Sweep the Sheds, and it's the same concept. Where their team philosophy is, we carry each other's luggage, and we sweep the sheds, and we clean the locker rooms, and we do all those things because it's a critical component to the leadership.
I'm going to switch gears on us just for a few minutes. I kicked us off on the impact of COVID and how we practice servant-based leadership in the midst of that. The title of today's session was, servant-based leadership in the midst of turmoil.
Yeah.
As Matt mentioned, as we kicked this off, we've had a lot of racial turmoil and strife in the last several weeks. And we didn't really intend, when we set this session up a couple of months ago, we didn't know that this was going to be a topic, but I think it plays in perfectly for this panel. I would just love, your all's impression of where we are today and what role you all see servant-based leadership playing in the current challenges that this country is facing.
Me being a black African-American man, I think my role is to, educate people who's unlike me, help them understand, and I think that's, like I said, those people around me instill that in me, not to sit back and just watch, but to have conversation with different leaders around the community. No, I'm not, you don't see my face out there in a protest or anything of that nature, but on the back end of it, talking to different leaders and saying what are different people who I respect in the community, what can we change or what can we do better as a community, not just blacks, not just whites, and it's just different ideas we're throwing back and forth at each other, and just have different things on your mind you need to talk about. If you're gonna attack something, attack it with a plan. Have a plan and go with it. And make the smaller things and the bigger thing, the big things, and go for it. I don't think, we talked about communication, I don't think just sitting back and not talking about it fixes anything, because I don't think this is going away anytime soon. But we got to have a plan as a community or as a nation and attack it. And it's going to have to come with change. It's going to have to come with understanding, understanding where you're coming from, and I have to sit and listen to understand, and you have to sit and listen where I'm coming from. And I don't think yelling back and forth to Kevin is going to fix that. I don't think, I can't blame, if you don't feel like I feel, I can't blame him for not feeling that way. I just have to help him understand.
But I've got to be willing to listen too,
for sure.
Right?
Listen is, it's like any other argument in the world. You have to listen, and you have to be supportive of what the person's telling you. We don't have to agree. Doesn't mean I don't like you. It's much more than, just me feeling this type of way. There's always two sides to a story, and you have to understand where your person you're talking to is coming from. If you hadn't walked a mile in my shoes, there's no way you can understand where I'm coming from. If I can tell you my story, I would, but I'm not going to go there.
Well, Demory, what you're hitting on, though, that requires, number one, humility. For me to go, I don't my point of view, my world is not the world.
Exactly
It requires
right.
humility for me to acknowledge that and go, I can learn from Demore. Let me listen to him. And then it requires a respect. To Roy, to your point, even if Demore and I disagree on something, for him to go ahead and listen to me and me to listen to him, there's a mutual respect there. I think that's, as I heard you talking, my thought was, it is costing you something to reach out and have those conversations you're having. You could go on about your life. It'd be easier for you potentially just to go on. It's costing you something, but again, you're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about the greater good of our community
For sure.
in that, and trying to model humility and respect. And I think, to your point, that's what we need a lot more of. Kevin, I know we've talked about this a little bit.
Yeah, in fact, we just shared a quote. I think it's appropriate
You
maybe
should share
to
it.
read
Yes.
that quote
It's amazing.
this morning. And again, it speaks to the sacrificial leadership. It takes effort, and when you're changing hearts, is what you're describing. At least that's my perspective
Yes,
of it,
sir.
and that's the hard work. And this quote, anyway, I think it's great to share. It's a quote by Judith Martin. The whole country wants civility. Why don't we have it? It doesn't cost anything. No federal funding. No legislation is involved. One answer is the unwillingness to restrain oneself. Everybody wants other people to be polite to them, but they want the freedom of not having to be polite to others. And I think that speaks a little bit to the sacrificial leadership part. So to your point, we've got to give of ourselves, a component of ourselves, to sit down and have that genuine conversation with others, because ultimately we're serving the individual that we're sitting across from as we talk through some things. And I think it's incredibly important, Matt, we've talked about this as well, to deal in foundational truths. Because when you build a conversation or a process on things that aren't foundational, it tends to slip and slide and crumbles on you. And the foundational truths that I don't know that we see going on right now are words like grace and love and hope and faith and trust and compassion and empathy. Those are all those foundational truths and those heart words that really are hard to argue with. I mean, that's what we're all called to be and do. So that piece is, I think, really, really important and can help us address the challenges that we have if we just, there's no magic solution to it, right? And it's not a quick fix. But if we wake up every day with the willingness and the attitude to open ourselves up, be a little vulnerable, and listen to what others have to say, Demore, you hit the nail on the head. We know, I don't think any one person can say, I fully understand your walk, right? And that gets back to the sum of the individual parts. I think the beauty of teams and organizations and communities is that each person has been blessed with unique skills and talents and abilities. And if we're open and receptive to that, then the sum of the individual parts will be greater than the individual parts.
You see that play out all the time in athletics, right? Where you can have a team that has more talent, obviously, but doesn't play as a team.
Yes.
And a team that has less talent, but has each other's back, knows each other's weakness, and puts the other in front of their own needs. Mm-hmm. And, I'll bet on the second team most of the time, because the synergy of that just plays out.
It's funny that you say that, because Steve Duncan will always say, play for the guy beside you or the guy in front of you. Don't play for the guy in the mirror. And that hit home, because if you put your brothers first, then they're going to do the same for you. So it's always an eye for an eye, if that makes sense.
Well, Demore, what you're hitting on, and Roy, I'm going to drag you into this, see what you think about this as well. What you guys are hitting on is that requires a personal relationship. For you to play for the guy beside you requires you knowing for and caring about that guy.
Right.
To have empathy, all these things requires the personal relationship. It's really easy to vilify a group. It's very hard to vilify a person. And I think in our culture, as a country, we've got a tendency to vilify groups. It's all the Democrats, it's all the Republicans, it's all the blacks, it's all the whites. It's what we just paint this broad brush of an entire group.
Could be Belmont, not Murray State.
Yeah,
right?
it's all Belmont. Well, that's accurate.
Well, that's true.
I'm not going to go there.
For those who don't know, my daughter graduated from Belmont, so we have an interfamily rivalry.
Yeah,
always,
there's a little challenge Roy has in his home
Sorry
a couple of times a year, right?
That's exactly right.
But But I think it's easy to vilify a group and paint a broad brush
Right.
and say, that's the problem. But then you sit down like this and you talk to someone who's a part of that quote unquote group, and you get to know them and you build a relationship.
Right.
Well, Demore's not going to vilify me, and I'm not going to vilify him even if we disagree.
Right.
Because I respect you, and I know your character, and we have a relationship. Roy, I'm curious from your point of view, and then you guys can weigh in. I think there's a role we have as leaders in modeling that, because it's not being modeled very much in our culture right now. What thoughts do you have on that? What's that look like?
I think you're absolutely right, Matt, that it's not being modeled, certainly politically, right, which is a sad commentary.
Yep.
But politically, it's not. I think it is modeled, at the local level a lot, and that's what I love and I appreciate is that, locally it becomes one-to-one at
Conversation.
that point in
Yep.
time, not the masses or groups, to your point, Matt. But I think, through this process, I'll just share a personal reflection. I've had to really do some soul searching about what can I do as a leader, right, to better model the right behaviors for myself, for my organization, specifically on the racial injustice issue.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've shared with you, Demore's a family member. He's my son, and I like to think that I'm not racist in any way, shape, or form, but through this process, really have to do some deep soul searching and saying, as an organization, have I really modeled that?
Yep.
Right? And it's, my organization, we've talked a lot about actions speak louder than words, right? And it's not what we say, but it's what we do, right? And it's how we get involved in our community, how we work, and as a business leader, I'm really thinking now, how do I challenge myself to pull other business leaders together and start to address some of the challenges and some of the injustices that still exist today that have to be fixed.
That we may not even be aware of because
Right.
we're not listening,
Bingo.
right? Yeah.
And that speaks to, I think about, Roy, is just the concept of unconscious bias, right? The human brain, I'm going to go back to my undergrad in psychology, but real quick, the human brain, you analyze, 5 million data points a day. And so the human brain is one of the most efficient machines in taking data, grouping it together, putting it in a box, calling that box something, and filing it away. And in this particular case, I think two things. We have to unlearn that, because you got to unpack that box and understand the differences and not apply that theme to that box to everything that you see in your world. And I think that's so important for us to do, and that speaks to when you understand what unconscious bias is and how it works, you can challenge yourself and your organization. And they do unconscious bias trainings. We do them on campus. There's entities that do that. And I would encourage leaders to do that, because it really identifies things in your organization that can help.
I appreciate that comment, Kevin. I smiled really big at you because if I felt my ribs jabbing from my wife and my daughter. We had a really long conversation, several long conversations in the last week, because my initial reaction is defensiveness. And I think it is that bias, right? And it took them really pushing me hard to get through that, for me to get to this point of really consciously realizing that I've got to reflect and be honest with myself first on where are those biases and what can I do to tear down those walls and listen better.
And ultimately, we're chasing a culture we can't catch with social media and those sort of things, right? Because it is not now in our nature with texts and Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat. You're just so quick, it's on to the next thing. And so it's not a natural reaction, particularly for younger generations, to sit down and have a conversation where you're going to be challenged. But that really, there's no quick solution.
No,
and
it's
in
not.
my mind, there's no finish line to it ever. Ultimately, it's the effort to do so and the intent that speaks to our success.
Any other thoughts you guys have on that? We about to.
I mean, we got to understand that we're trying to change hearts of people who's much older than us, who's been around longer. So you have to sit down and have those conversations, who see things, that's tunnel vision, see things one way. So you have to be understanding of that they've been around long enough. This is the way they always saw it.
Yep.
And it may not be right, and you don't have to agree, but at least break down that barrier
You can still
and
be
talk to them.
respectful, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And same way the other way. So
That's
you
right.
have to understand that we're all trying to, well, I'm speaking for myself, I can't speak for everybody else, trying to change lives and how we do things, and whether it's racial, and it's much bigger than black versus white. I could just go ahead and tell you that. It's not just all black versus white or white versus, it's much bigger than that. So you got to understand the audience you're attacking. You got to understand their points and how long they've been around. Everybody thinks their way is the right way, until you sit down and listen.
Right.
Then you realize that they have a point.
Yep.
So, and I'm going to speak on the NFL, for example. Roger Goodell, he wouldn't be up a creek if he was spoke sooner. And I truly feel that way. Being a leader, you got to be the first one out to jump out the gate and do your homework.
Mm-hmm.
And if Roger Goodell had been a leader, not saying he's not a leader, had been a leader, but and spoke to Colin Kaepernick first, and all this stuff I wouldn't say all of them, the NFL wouldn't be up a creek.
Yeah.
With people either taking a knee or.
If more conversations, the more conversations you have, the less animosity is developed.
Exactly, because you understand where I'm coming from,
Yeah.
and I understand where you're coming from. So it's just, this panel is about communication and being a leader. The greatest leaders communicate with their people, and that's just what it is. I can't expect to be a great leader if I'm out here just doing what I want to do and not looking out for my organization or telling my people what's going on. That's just what it is.
That's good.
So as a leader, there might be some of our viewers that are thinking, okay, well, how do I structure that conversation?
Yes.
Right. So to dial down into the weeds, maybe even greater. And there's no one size fits all here.
No.
I think when you're speaking about matters of the heart and foundational truths, there's certainly not. But maybe just if I can offer up an example of some of the things that we're doing in our conversations within our organizations is three things. First, just talking about what connects us, right? What are our similarities that connects us? And then what are those beauties of difference or diversity where we can recognize both, right? So we have this in common and this connects us, but we're also different here. And these are the reasons why we're successful as an organization when we embrace these differences, i.e. diversity, and the importance of that. The second piece for our staff and our young people that I think has been really critical and part of the conversations is just creating a space for individuals to feel comfortable to communicate what is on their heart. Where are you? Are you angry? Are you sad? Are you indifferent? Are you nervous, scared? Whatever the case may be, is to create that space so that you can fully understand where somebody is. And then the last thing, I think you follow that up with, okay, number 2 is where are you now? And number 3 is where do you want to go?
Have a plan.
And how do we get there? And when you have enough of those conversations individually and one-on-one or in small groups or whatever the case may be, I think you're going to start to see some themes in your organization that will emerge into a list of a handful of things that you can move forward with as an organization. And there's already investment and buy-in in that because you've done the work and you've had the conversations to get there as a group.
I just want to highlight the very first thing you said was start with what we have in common and then how our diversity complements one another. And sometimes I feel like we start with where we disagree instead of what we have in common. We've got way more in common. If you can find common ground with somebody, you can solve pretty much any issue. And the reality is, I'll use you as an example, Demore, the color of your skin, the color of my skin, that is a very, very small difference. We have way more in common, right? Than we have differences. And that's the value of the conversation again, to sit down and have a conversation to find those commonalities and then to appreciate the distinct diversity and differences in one another. Now you can, to your point, I think the order of what you said is crucial because now you can start moving things forward. You have the trust to be open with each other about where you are and what you're feeling. And then you can put a plan together. And when you're on the set, I mean, this is sports, just translated into life, right? But when you do that on a team and you're on the same page, well, you accomplish some extraordinary things. So maybe that's a great starting point for us, Kevin.
Those are hard conversations.
Sure.
And they're crucial conversations. There's a book that I lean on a lot, Crucial Conversations, and the whole premise is a shared information pool.
Yep.
Most of the time in let's just say the professional business world, if you have disagreement in a corporation or organization, it's because one party or the other doesn't know the full set of information that the other does. So the very first step has to be sitting down and having the A to B conversation, not the A to C to B conversation,
Right.
but the A to B to share an information pool. And I think the book says 85 to 90% of agreements will dissolve when you have two individuals that have open hearts and share a pool of information and they understand that perspective.
No, it's good.
Great points. Great points. Matt, I don't know if we've been getting any questions yet. I know we've got an opportunity now for questions for our panelists, and you can add those in the comment section of the Facebook
Yep,
Live.
right
Is that
underneath
correct,
this
Matt?
post.
Yep, absolutely.
While we're waiting on to see if any other questions come in, let's just big picture drill down for just a second. What are some of the things, if we've got people watching going, I want to be this kind of leader, and we're calling it servant-based leadership. Pat Lencioni has just written a book called The Motive on this, and I love what he says. He says, I look forward to the day when we don't refer to it as servant-based leadership, because it's the only kind of leadership there is, sacrificial leadership. People who are sitting watching this and they're thinking, okay, but in my situation, how do I demonstrate this and how do I model it? Can you guys just drill down on some really simple everyday things you do to model this? Anything you want to toss out?
Well, Damari, you touched on it in terms of being out and about and being
Present.
with your employees. That is, I think, one of the most crucial pieces is to be visible, because in doing that, that's the first step to building strong relationships and alliances that help you get things done under normal circumstances, much less under crisis. I think the core values of honesty and integrity and those sort of things are
Sure.
critical. So that is a necessary ingredient, I think. But it's I hate to say common sense, but it comes down to what are you attracted to? How do you like to be led?
Great point.
And you like to be led with people that have character and integrity and have strong pursuit of knowledge and do all the things that we're talking about. So it's really an introspective, how do I like to be led? And where can I get better? Open to feedback and those sort of things. So again, it all starts with conversations.
I think that's great. Same thing.
It's the same exact thing,
But you guys are both, and y'all have already touched on this. Oh, you may not call it this, but you both, and I know, Roy, you do as well in your organization. You guys all have systems, and you may not think of it that way, but you have systems that make sure those conversations happen.
Right.
You have systems that make sure you are accessible to people, and you have systems to make sure you're transparent with people about things.
Right.
And it's common sense to your point. But Damari, when you said, hey, I'm showing up in the stores, well, that's it right there. That's one way you're doing that. It's a system of you're showing up, you're checking in on people, and I think that's a lot more powerful sometimes than we realize.
Agree. And I tell people, and I interview people once, maybe twice a week, and I tell them, I'm always going to be honest with you. I can expect you to be honest with me if I'm not honest with you.
Yep.
I will always be straightforward with you. Evaluations, the hardest time you'll have, because I'm going to be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
If we expect you to be here and you're here, I'm probably going to tell you that you're here and try to push you to be here.
Yeah.
So it's just reaching people. How do you reach out to people? Like he said, how do you want people to lead you? And that's the way you should model yourself after. So, if you want someone out there just doing all the good things and I love the way what he's doing, then you look yourself in the mirror and work towards that.
Well, evaluations are a great example, because I think for all of us as leaders, it's way more comfortable for us not to be fully honest. It's way more comfortable for you not to tell me
Yeah, exactly.
all the areas where I need to grow, right? Just to let it go. But if you care about me more than you that's what you just said. I push through that, and I try to help that person get to where they can be.
Right. And then me personally, it's easier for me to have these conversations because I know a lot of people in this Murray area. But if you're just an average Joe, I can understand why you want to blow it off and move on. But blowing it off and moving on doesn't fix the issue.
Doesn't help anybody.
It just makes it worse. And I have the most awkward conversations walking through a parking lot, and I'll be there for 20 minutes, as if yesterday, a guy was talking to me, and he said, we got on a racial subject, and he said, well, how do you feel? You're a black man. And I told him exactly how I feel. And I said, I can expect you to understand that, but I want you to listen to understand where I'm coming from. And I want to listen to your point. And we sit there and had a 20-minute conversation in the parking lot.
In the parking lot.
So it doesn't have to be a sit down.
That's right. It's an
By any
openness.
means.
It's a mindset.
So, an opportunity presents itself, you take it and run with it. It's easier for me to have those conversations because I can talk to a brick wall. But, if you're just an average Joe, I can understand that barrier. But you got to be willing to push through it.
Kevin, do you have a follow-up?
I do. And in fact, you just said it. I was thinking as Matt was talking and earlier as you were as well, the performance evaluation has such a negative stigma in the professional world. And like you said, because it's hard, or you gloss over it and you don't make change. Every organization's got core values, and they have standards that they measure themselves up. And ultimately, there's got to be productivity. To your point, if you're doing all the things that we've talked about here today and you have those relationships with your employees, we talk about internally within athletics, that better not be just a once-a-year conversation.
Exactly.
That's a daily conversation, evaluating ourselves to our core values and what we're trying to produce and create, because if it's a daily conversation, it's just it's a conversation theme throughout the year, as opposed to, okay, we got to sit down and have a performance.
That's so true.
Great points, Matt. We've got do have a question from the audience, and it's follow-up to the comment you made about creating systems, right?
Yep.
As organizations, we create systems, and as both Kevin and Demore have said, it's about conversations. And this question is, how do we create systems that can create these conversations within our community that aren't just limited to our own organizations?
It's a great question. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
It's a great question.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult, but I think ultimately there's a vulnerability that has to exist there. The medium and the format can vary when you talk about it being a community. It can be as simple as walking down your neighborhood street and the neighbor's out, and it may be a neighbor that you haven't spent a whole lot of time with, and you introduce yourself and you talk about thoughts and where you are in certain things. It could be in the grocery store. It could be something organized in the community. I think it's the initial, getting over the initial hump of making yourself vulnerable and creating a space, like we talked about that point 2, the 3-point, create the space where people feel comfortable communicating.
I think you definitely have to move outside of your bubble to make this happen. I can't tell you exactly how to do that because I haven't had personal experience to do that. But, it's tough. I do know it's tough. But once you step outside your bubble and find somebody that's not like you and having a conversation with them, I think you already started it. And they don't have to agree, like I said, but you already stepped outside of your bubble. Now, keep moving. If you talk to one person a week or 2 people a week that's not in the same group as you, and then I think you already started what you're trying to work on.
I keep hearing you say have a plan, right?
Exactly.
And if that plan includes being intentional about who am I communicating with and how do I communicate. When I saw this question, my immediate reflection was I'm sure disappointed we're not having our next steps in our traditional format. Because, Kevin, in that traditional format, we've got round tables, 6 or 7 people. There would have been a natural time to have these conversations, right, within business leaders. So I'm going to challenge each one of our business leaders watching today is, even though we can't be together today, you've got other business leaders. Reach out, have these conversations. Go grab lunch. You can do it in a socially distanced way, right? Do a Zoom. But I think, Demore, to a point you just made, is you've got to push ourselves to get beyond our normal circles as well, right? And get diverse. And you said it's okay to disagree. I agree completely, Demore, and I think you really I need to be pushing myself to find people who are going to challenge me.
Right.
And probably may not have the same opinions as me, because that's how I'm going to be pushed to get beyond my preconceived notions, beyond my biases, Kevin, that you mentioned, and really push to become a better leader.
Isn't it interesting, and the light bulb just went off for me, Roy, isn't it interesting that the solution to COVID-19 is the detriment to our social injustice issues? The isolation and the social distancing is completely opposite end of the spectrum in terms of what it's going to take for us to make headway in the other area. Anyway.
Yeah, and just listening to you guys, my first thought on this was, you know what, a program, an organized community program, I don't know that that's the first step. I think it starts with what Damori said and what you mentioned. It is, and I love the way you said it. The question I would ask everybody is, when's the last time you had lunch, you had dinner, you had a conversation with somebody from a vastly different background or perspective than yours? And let's be honest, for most of us, it's like, well, I don't, we just naturally, we don't have those. I mean, as human beings, we tend to gravitate to people like us. And so to walk across an aisle, to reach a hand to the other side, to bridge a divide and have that conversation, Roy, the system may be, let's just start with us, and let's say once a month we're going to have one of those conversations, 12 of them a year, and then see what happens from there.
It's a great point, Matt, and I think an exact point to the question that just came in from our audience is, do you think people should feel obligated to get out of their comfort zone and have these different conversations? Damori, do you think our audience, the leaders here in Murray, Callaway County, and West
Yes.
Kentucky, should they be obligated?
I would say yes, due to the fact that not being obligated is a result of what we're in now. You know, nobody wants to step out and step on anybody's toes, or nobody wants to see anything through anybody else's eyes. Just stay in their bubble, and that's the result we're in now. If everybody takes ownership and step out and maybe talk to different people that's unlike them, then it's like, you know,
Yep.
I'm not just simply judging that guy off his appearance. You know, so what if he got face tattoos? Have a conversation with him, talk to him, see where he's coming from, understand what his tattoos mean to him, and go from there.
I think, yes, obligation is a good word to use. I think it's what we're called to do.
Exactly.
I think, you know, we certainly have received, and everybody has received feedback, a diverse amount of feedback about our global issues and what's going on in Murray here locally as well. And I think it's important to try and convert those texts and emails into conversations over the phone and in-person sit-downs, to your point, and understand perspectives, all the things we've talked about, and entering with an open heart and compassion and empathy and those foundational truths. And those are uncomfortable. But to Matt's point, just you know, being called or obligated to do those things ultimately moves the needle for us.
One more question just came in. I'll let the two of you weigh in. I agree with both of you on what you said. I think it's a responsibility, right, Roy? If we care about our community, it's a responsibility we have.
It's a responsibility, and just one more point. Kevin, you said we're called to do it. I couldn't agree anymore. You know, and when I think of servant-based leaders, there's the best example ever in the world is Jesus walking this earth. And I think if he walked in today, he would absolutely say it's an obligation. You have no choice but to help solve this issue.
Yep. So one of the questions that came in, you both can weigh in on this. How can the world see inside the dynamics of a team's locker room and how race relations have been solved within those walls? So I think what they're asking is, hey, how come we don't have as many race issues inside of athletics, and what are the lessons there that we can transfer to our community at large? Go ahead, Damori.
When you spend so much time with a person,
Yep.
you understand where that person is coming from. You know that his intentions is great. You know, he's going to put his life on the line just as well as I'm going to put my life on the line for it. So I'm going to go to war for that guy just like he's doing the same for me. I wouldn't say you don't see it in the locker room, but guys put themselves last for a much bigger goal, whether that's winning or whether that's making them a better person. They put themselves last due to being a great friend to their black teammate or white teammate who may be.
So there are different perspectives, but the trust between the teammates overrides all of that.
For sure. I mean, when you, like I said, when you spend time with people, you understand people. You know, he may say something out of whack, and your mind, young me would say, well, what did he mean by that? But
Right.
once you talk to him, he say something, it doesn't seem that weird anymore because of the fact that you talk to him and you understand what he's coming from.
Yeah.
So I don't, it's
That's-
all about putting yourself in a position to help others out and understand everybody's coming from. It's not like, you know, I go on the field with Kevin. It's not like, you know, game day is the only day we talk, you know.
Well, that's a great point.
So
It's a relationship.
it is a relationship. If Kevin's my safety and I'm a corner, you know, I guarantee we communicate constantly.
You're not just teammates, you're friends,
He-
right?
Exactly. He know that I'm going to undercut that route and he can be over top. It's something when you talk to people and you've been around people, you know.
Yep.
So it's all about communication and being a great teammate or a great person to the next man.
You were an athlete, now you're leading athletics.
Yeah, I'm clearly biased on the athletics piece, but if I were to describe athletics, you know, briefly, it's the ability for a group of people to discard, to sacrifice, to ultimately sacrifice a piece of themselves for the success of a group. And if I was to define a coach, I would say that a coach is the ability for a group of individuals to get from point A to point B, right? And the maximization of point B is the coach, right? So the analogy of if it's strictly athletics, and obviously we're into development as students, as people as well, but if you focus strictly on the athletic piece, a successful athletic team is focused on your ability to bring attributes to the team.
Correct.
Whether those are leadership attributes or skills and abilities, your ball handling skills, your ability to shoot, your ability to close 40 yards of distance. Every single one of those individuals has a unique skill and attribute in a team, and it's the ability to focus in on that and the productivity of the team and the individual contribution to that greater effort that ultimately maximizes the success of that team. Okay? We're all familiar with that. Now apply that to society. And those are the things that we're talking about now. And so in my mind, athletics and the locker room is inherently built to maximize group productivity. And so that maximization of that group, that's what athletics is all about. We're trying to get as far as we can, right? The March Madness, we're trying to get to the Final Four. We're trying to get to as far as we can, and you're going to maximize every piece of that. If we apply that, I think, as a community and as a society, we can go a long ways.
Well, I know we got to wrap up real quick. What happens to simplify this? The best coaches, the best leaders, they rally everyone around a common problem or challenge. In sports, it's win this championship. To use this example right now, let's just take our community, not talk about the entire nation. Our community, though, okay, what's the common problem and the common challenge we have when it comes to racial injustice, systematic racism? This is where you find the common ground, get everybody on the same page. Once everybody is on the same page with the problem, that's when you present a solution, and that's when you talk about the urgency of why it has to happen now. That's what happens naturally in a locker room with the best coaches every year. And if we can translate that into our leadership with our community and walk down the same path, we'll see some sustained, significant change take place.
Yes.
Absolutely. And one other reflection I had listening to Kevin and Demore, when you talk about athletics and teams, it's back to the comment Matt made early. It's individuals, not groups. A team is not a group at that point in time, right?
Exactly.
They know each individual player. They know the strengths. They know the weaknesses. And I think that's a key for us as leaders in our community is to get to know the individuals, to challenge ourselves, to have an obligation to get out of our comfort zone, to start solving the real injustices that are there. We've got to admit there's a problem. We've got to solve the problem. And one thing I know about this community, they will solve whatever they put their mind to solving.
Yep.
And that's the great thing about Murray and Callaway County.
Absolutely.
So I hate to do this, but we are out of time. We promised an hour, and we're sitting here right up on the hour time mark. Wish we had a full audience here to give DeMaury and Kevin a round of applause, because you guys did a great job today. I've learned a ton. I've made a lot of notes. And as a special thank you, we've got a thank you card, but we've made a donation to the Soup for the Soul, to their summer lunch and literacy program, and also to Main Street Youth Center in both of your all's
great.
names
Thank you.
as a special thank you. So on behalf of Peel and Holland and Journey and everyone watching today and that will be watching, thank you guys for sharing
Absolutely.
your wisdom and challenging us all to become better leaders, because when the leader gets better, everybody wins. Special thanks to CFSB as well. Jason, we'll let you off the hook this time on lunch, but you're not going to get off the hook as soon as we get back together. So, but seriously, as our leadership development partner, CFB does a great job here in Murray, and we appreciate it very much.
A final thing I'll add, the challenges in our community will only be solved by leaders. Leaders have to lead the way. And the better we become as leaders, as Roy just said, when a leader gets better, everyone wins. It's why we've hosted Global Leadership Summit here in Murray for the last couple of years. It's why we're going to continue to host it. This year is going to be a little different because of mass gathering issues and social distancing guidelines. We're not going to host it in person this year, but it is available digitally for you to watch, and it's going to be on August 6th and 7th this year. You can go to glsmurray.com, glsmurray.com. You can find all the info. You can register. You can watch it right there from your home or your office. Quick rundown: Craig Rochelle, Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School, Beth Comstock from Nike, Marcus Buckingham, Nona Jones from Facebook, Michael Todd, Lisa Turkhurst, Sadie Robertson, a lot more are going to be the faculty sharing. It is the best 2 days of leadership development that I have ever participated in. So while we're online, we'll be online together here in the community. Let's keep growing and learning, and let's get better, because as we do, our community improves. So thank you guys so much for watching. Again, Kevin, DeMaury, thank you. Roy, thank you. Appreciate you guys being here, and appreciate all of y'all watching.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Matt.
it.
Thanks, team. Thanks, guys.
All right. Have a great afternoon.